This is Raven Dana, and welcome to Walking Between the Worlds. This is class 1 of the series of 4 called Listening to the Trees. It is July 6th, 2022, and I'm so excited to be offering this class. I have loved trees since I was a very little girl, and I've always thought them to be special and sentient. I've always had a sense that the trees were not only conscious and aware of my presence, but that they did in fact talk to each other. And I have been so thrilled through the years to discover that science is uncovering more and more information that special people who have started, for example, in the logging profession. The woman who wrote the book, Finding the Mother Tree, which we'll talk about a little bit later, started in the logging profession, and she became so in love with the trees and so aware of the trees that she became a scientist. And her work and her studies has essentially helped to revolutionize forest management. So there is so much documentation now that validates and verifies what our ancestors always knew and believed to be so about trees, that they are sentient, that they communicate, that they are aware, and that they are placeholders, that some trees that have been here for a very, very long time have watched evolution go by. So we're going to start today with a little bit more of the science, not anything complicated, but some of the facts, some of the things that we've learned, that we know about how trees communicate and what happens in a forest and what the forest community really is about. And of course, we don't know that much scientifically, but we do have some clues now as to how the communication works, and it's absolutely remarkable. And let's just think about forests for a minute. I mean, they're magical places. They're places filled with wonder, also places of danger, and places that hold secrets. They're places where if you get lost, you might find a magical being to lend you a helping hand, or you might be lost in the deep, dark woods and never be seen again. So forests hold all kinds of images and emotions in our histories and in our mythologies. We have, of course, the tree of life, which has shown itself in many forms in different cultures. And we will be exploring these in future classes as well. I'm going to just start by reading you a quote. This is from a book called The Songs of Trees by David George Haskell. And he is one of the people that's done tremendous research on communication among trees in a forest. And also he's done tremendous research on rainforests, which we will talk a bit about later. But I was so thrilled to come across this quote because I had called the class Listening to the Trees, and in the foreword of this book, he speaks to that issue. So just sit back and relax and enjoy the class. The living memories of trees, which manifest in their songs, tell the story of their communities. We human beings belong within that conversation, for we are their kin. To listen to the trees is to hear our own voices and to hear the voices of our larger family. We are all of us, humans, trees, insects, birds, pluralities. We are not singular entities, but networks of lives. All of life exists within this embodied network. Our ethic, therefore, must be one of belonging. To listen to trees, nature's greatest connectors, is one way to learn how to inhabit the relationships that give life its source, its substance, and its beauty. I think that's a lovely quote. And I think it also speaks to how we have lost our connection to nature, many of us. That in our culture, we're somehow seen as distinct from or separate from or outside of or superior to nature, which simply isn't true. Or that we can exist apart from nature, which clearly isn't true. So in exploring the trees as a community, as kin, as relatives, as our friends and allies, we also get to reestablish, to reset our thinking about the way we are actually inside of nature and part of the natural world, not separate, not better than, not distinct from, but actually completely interwoven with all of nature. And we'll see that more and more as we go through the class. So trees, even though they seem to stand alone, right? They seem independent. Their trunks raised straight and true to the sky. But below the ground, their roots interface. They interface with a thriving fungal system. And the relationship with this cooperative system and the larger body is called the mycelium. Acts as essentially a nervous system for the trees in the forest. It is a similar kind of network to our own human nervous system. In fact, the way the trees communicate is that the mycelium wrap around and even penetrate the roots of the trees. And the exchange between the tree and the fungal network is one of cooperation, so that they pass resources, they pass foods and sugars and nutrients to each other. And the network serves as a channel of communication. So through chemical messengers, a tree can communicate with other trees in the forest. And I don't just mean, pass on information about the weather. Trees have a capacity to recognize other trees that are its saplings. Trees can warn other trees of danger, and do so in a way that those other trees receiving the signal are capable of and do change their chemistry, change their morphology. They shift to deal with the threat. For example, at one part of the forest, maybe there's an infestation of some kind of insect. And so through the network, the trees at that edge of the forest begin to communicate across the wider net that there's something to pay attention to, that this insect is here. Well, what happens then is that trees farther along the communication line begin to make one of two things, or sometimes both, depending on the species of tree. Some trees will make a chemical that will attract birds or other insects that are predators to the ones that are destroying the trees. And they can even produce an insecticide which will make them resistant to those insects and or kill them. So it's not in any way a passive communication. It is a thriving, active exchange of information, very much like I would call somebody and say, the power's going to go out. Run to the store and get what you need now, right? And so you do. There's a response. So it's fascinating because the chemical messengers that are used are very similar to the neurotransmitters in a human brain. In fact, there are corresponding neurotransmitter substances that are based on sucrose. For example, you may know what serotonin is. It is our feel-good chemical. It is the chemical that often, if people are anxious or are depressed, they receive something called a serotonin reuptake inhibitor that keeps the feel-good chemical in their system longer. Well, trees have their corresponding chemicals that are similar to the chemistry of our brain. And those chemicals are part of that network of communication. So it's absolutely fascinating. The mycelium are essentially very, very tiny, thin threads of the greater fungal organism. In fact, the mycelium are considered to be the largest organism on the planet. It's remarkable. Trees in the forest are in constant communication with each other, and even over fairly significant distances. They pass nutrients, they pass resources, and they might even favor their own saplings because they can and do recognize them. Forest bathing is something that you hear about now, and this is not just a passive term. There are places in the world where you can get a prescription for forest bathing. I kid you not. And essentially what we know about that is that for example, in a pine forest, when the sunlight hits the pine trees, The trees exude chemicals that we breathe in, and they also absorb through our skin. And those chemicals actually have a positive effect on our system. It enhances our immune system. It actually elevates our mood. It interfaces with our own brain chemistry and not only makes us feel good, but strengthens our immune system in a way that that for about a month, about 28 days, again, there's that interesting magic number again, 28 days, a lunar cycle, our system registers that 20-minute forest bath. So if we regularly went out into the forest, it's not just, it is, of course, that we get away from everything and we put down our phones and we move ourselves into a place where we're using our senses, but it's also that we are communicating with the life around us, that the trees are producing chemicals that we breathe in and that pass through our skin that help us, that enhance us, that make us stronger and better and calmer. And I think that's a wonderful thing that science is figuring that out, right? That science is actually getting proof that that is so. Suzanne Simard, I'll mention her again when we talk more about the mother tree, but she's a writer she's a scientist who has done a tremendous amount of research as well on what mother trees are. They are the hubs of the forest. They're generally the oldest and or the tallest trees, and they are the central figures of communication. They have tremendous wisdom, and I don't say that lightly. When in forestry now, when they go through and take some of the trees, they're learning to leave the mother tree and her saplings untouched. Not that running through the forest cutting down trees is a good thing, but clearly it's something that we do and that we've done for a long time. There's a way to do it that is not going to destroy the forest, and there's a way not to do it. And she has been one of those people that's brought forth this tremendous volume of information about how the trees actually interface and communicate with each other. So trees, when they're linked underground by this network, they perceive, they relate, they help each other. They can warn other trees and plants, the understory. The plants that are the tree helpers are also critically important and are part of this network system. The biggest and older trees not only are the hubs of communication, but when they communicate, they are able to pass on their knowledge, their experience. So the mother trees are able to tell the younger trees, share information with the younger trees about species of insects, types of insects that might be harmful, about animals that might be harmful. And without these, the saplings having the interaction, they receive the information. So in the presence then of those kinds of threats, the younger trees are able, even without a warning signal, the trees are able to then do something to protect themselves, which I think is astonishing, right? So the mother trees are important because as the center of wisdom, also when a mother tree is dying, when they age and they die, then they are also able to pass on that information. And not only the information, but they pass on nutrients. So it's very interesting that when a tree is dying, it will often pass on its nutrients both to its saplings, but also to other trees that may be struggling so that they have a better chance. If an older tree is succumbing to something, say an infestation, then again that information, the nutrients and the chemicals are not left to die with the tree. The tree passes them on to others, to friends and family, so that they receive that benefit. Do you remember in high school science class what a neuron looked like, a nerve cell looked like? It's kind of these fingers, and then the ions, the electrical impulse jumps the gap, jumps the synapse, and then the information goes and jumps the synapse, right? How it's passed. Well, if you can remember that, just recognize that that is the same type of process that the trees use in their network to pass information. It is very much like a human brain and nervous system. So here's something else that's interesting, that certain trees have greater abilities than just, say, for example, if they encounter a beetle infestation, they might be able to produce a toxin to kill the beetles, or they might be able to produce a chemical that will make them not taste good to the beetles. That's another thing they can do. Acacia trees are spectacular. They do a number of different kinds of things. Acacia trees can produce a toxin that when certain animals eat them, it will kill the animal if they eat too much. So you can nibble, but if you eat too much, if you start to harm me, I will kill you, basically is what happens. Acacia trees are also known to produce neurotoxins. So I read an article about researchers who were studying this network of acacia trees. And when the researchers became too intrusive, the trees started to produce neurotoxins. And so essentially the researchers had to back off. They had to figure out what was going on. And then they had to produce a chemical, like a calming agent, for the trees so that they wouldn't produce the neurotoxins to, right? It's fascinating. But again, the ability of the trees, the sentience of the trees, is something that that most people miss. They don't recognize this deep level of connection and awareness that trees have. And again, part of that is just our human ego, that, we think if it doesn't look like us, it can't possibly, think or feel. And it's clearly not the case. The forest, then, a network of trees in a forest, it is integral in the larger planetary system, because trees are weather makers. They have to do with migration patterns. They also stir up the waters, and they lend themselves towards what happens with the circulation of oceans. So in an average forest in the United States, where you might walk through a forest, be conscious of the tremendous amount of information that's being passed along, all the methods of communication occurring under the ground, where the trees are in active communication with each other. Now, let's take that thought and move it for a moment to the rainforest. A rainforest is an entirely more complicated, I don't even know what to call it, organism. We'll call it an organism. Rainforests are actually Earth's oldest ecosystems, with some of them surviving in their present form for over 70 million years. 70 million years. They are incredibly diverse, and they're home to more than half of the planet's plant and animal species. Right? And rainforests only make up about 6% of the planet. Rainforests are absolutely critical to climate regulation, which has something to do with what's going on with our climate, okay? In fact, it's believed that the Amazonian forests alone can store over half of the Earth's rainwater at any given time. It's incredible. So in a rainforest, well, it rains. Every few hours it rains. The air is so thick and so dense that clouds form and hang in the canopy. There are clouds and mists hanging in the treetops. The air in a rainforest is a product of the forest. The water is so saturated with water vapor that the raindrops themselves are very heavy and large. And so it's not just the trees that are communicating underground with each other. It's layer after layer as life goes up into the canopy, that there are whole subsets of life. And here's an example. Plant diversity is unrivaled here again. Over 600 species of trees can be found in 1 hectare. More species of trees in 1 hectare than found in all of North America. Astonishing. There's a tree in the rainforest called the sabo. In the crown of the sabo, the canopy is unlike anything that you'll see in a North American forest, in what's called a temperate forest. Each tree, the surface of the tree is covered with hundreds of plant species. And if you climb up, if you get up into the canopy of a sabot tree, there's another entire layer of trees occurring. At the topmost points of a sabot tree and some of the other trees in the rainforest, the thick leaf litter has actually created a layer of soil on the top branches, on the higher branches. And on those branches, because that soil is rich and thick as it is on the forest floor. So we have other trees, most often fig trees, and other species of trees, and many, many vines that grow actually in that soil that's in the canopy. Now, not only that, but the trunk of the tree itself, in a rainforest, the trunks of trees have other things living on them. You might notice that you have a tree in the neighborhood that maybe has ivy or vines growing on it. But in the rainforest, you will see whole communities of orchids growing on the trunks of trees. And those orchids are interfaced with vines. And the vines and orchids together form a thick mat that holds water. And that water is what feeds the ferns that are growing in it. So there's an entire community that is growing right on the trunk of many of the trees in the rainforest. And when it rains, the leaves of the different layers on the trees and the leaves of the understory of the trees, of the plants, are shaped in such a way that the rainwater is funneled to where it needs to go to get things watered, to keep things alive. In the higher reaches of some of the canopies, plants called bromeliads hold the water, they capture water. One bromeliad plant can hold as much as 4 liters, which is more than a gallon of water. That's a lot of water. And in the leaf structure where the water is cupped and held, it serves as almost like a tide pool where frogs can hatch and certain kinds of insects and other kinds of life forms can hatch and thrive in the forest up in the canopy. It's just... in a rainforest, it is never silent. All right, it is never silent. The sounds in the Amazon never cease. The millions of strands of life that connect to each other here are packed so densely that there's sound that hums day and night all the time. So now we're talking about the trees in this community that are the grand connectors, that are the space holders, that are the conductors of this symphony of life, that communicate with each other and also communicate with the other life forms, the other plant life in the rainforest, so that this delicate balance, this ecosystem can be maintained and thrive. And which again brings us back to the point of what happens when we start cutting and burning rainforests, which is a very bad thing, not just for the forest itself, but for the planet, because so much of that ecosystem lends itself toward the larger cycles, including weather and ocean and such like that. So any attempt to separate one tree from another or one species from another essentially fails. The rainforest is the most detailed example that we have of interdependence in the natural world. The community of trees, fungi, microbes, plants, animals, including humans, right, and insects, is just inseparable. And the rainforest, of course, some of them have had 70 million years of practice in keeping things in this most amazing and delicate balance. The humans who live in rainforests are also very, very keenly aware of interspecies connections and connections with the plants. Westerners have called people who live in rainforests, uncivilized. But what Westerners are largely unaware of is the reality of that level of interdependence. Think about all of the medicines that come from plants, right? This is where all of our original medicines have come from. Well, how did we discover that? Do you think people just randomly chipped away at plants and started making brews out of them. Most of the elders in indigenous communities talk about the communication that they have with the plants, the way that they can actually know by asking the plant, by journeying into the plant kingdom and discovering what there is that can help heal, that can help set a bone, that can help reduce a fever, that can help with different rashes or illnesses, or right. So much of modern medicine has come from the exploration of the plant world, and especially of the plant life that we find in the jungle. Willow bark, right, for aspirin, birch for pain relief. There's so many different things, and we'll look a little bit more. We'll go tree by tree in another class and look more specifically at the medicinal offerings of the trees. Eucalyptus, right? That's something that everybody knows. Eucalyptus to open up the respiratory system and to help you breathe when you have a stuffy nose, and of course, and the marvelous smell of pine, which is in fact, as I said earlier, uplifting and gives a boost to the immune system, which I think is also interesting. We bring pine boughs and such into our homes around the holiday season in the dead of winter, and in the middle of winter, it's when we most need to have that boost. So my conversation is go spend that time out among the trees rather than hack down a tree and drag it into your home, although I know people love that tradition, and it does smell marvelous, and you can enjoy it, and there's another way to do it. So the more we learn about the connection with our tree kin, the more we come to understand and relate to each other as well, and our connections there. There's a note, but before we do the meditation today, I just want to say a few words about the human being and the body plural, that in the same way that trees are not singular, but they are connected in communities that talk to each other. It is also true that we do not operate as singular, and I'm not really talking here about social communities. I'm talking about the way we are immersed in nature. We are not and cannot be individual and survive. Like the trees in the rainforest, we share space with thousands of other organisms. Our skin is home to millions of bacteria, fungi, viruses. They compete for space. We have microbes living in our gut that help us with digestion. We have things in our mouth and up our noses and in our ears. So again, if it makes you crawly, get over yourself. I want you to just have this moment of realization that we are immersed in nature and she is immersed in us. I just want to read you a quote here. This is Lita Proctor of the National Institute of Health, who's leading the Human Microbiome Project. She says, "The human we see in the mirror is made up more of microbes than human. These microbes aren't just along for the ride. We have a symbiotic relationship with them. We give them a place to live, and they keep us alive. The human body contains about 100 trillion cells, but only about 1 in 10 of those cells is actually human." All right. So I hope you enjoyed the introduction to trees and the forest and the communication system today. The practice that I'd like for us to do this week is to touch the trees, to go find the trees that you like most in your neighborhood or in your favorite parks, or even to go for a walk in a place you've never been. And I'd like you to put your palm against the trunk of a tree. Run your fingertips along the bark of the tree. Stand in silence and just let yourself be present without an agenda, without trying to figure anything out, without thinking about anything. Just be present to the tree like you would to a person whose language you could not speak. All right? See what happens. See if you can experience the presence of the tree, the personality, the essence. I imagine that if we humans are aware of the trees that are in front of us, that they are also aware of us. So give yourself a little bit of time to have that experience if it's there for you. Trees, by the way, produce sound called infrasound. They also produce high frequency sound called ultrasound. But the infrasound, which just lays at and a little below the level of our human hearing, can often be heard or felt by humans and especially by children. In fact, in the Celtic tradition, there's a special term used for people who are able to listen to the trees, that can hear the trees. And so we're talking not at this point about the sound of the wind, rustling the leaves, although that's certainly part of the way a tree talks. But we're talking about these deep tones that are just below or at our range of hearing that can often seem more like a vibration than an actual sound. Now, trees are not unique in that. Other things in nature produce infrasound. Elephants produce infrasound. A lot of large animals do, as do the large trees. Infrasound is also a product of tectonic plate movement. So before there's an earthquake, there is infrasound. So I just want you to be aware that if you feel a resonance or hear something, you're not crazy. There's something going on there that your nervous system is responding to. So let yourself have the experience. I had a very good friend. Well, he's on the other side now. He's still a friend. He just doesn't have a body. When I was in college, my very good friend, the director, Dr. William Zoller, told us this story. And he was also, he had a particular love of trees. And he went to Kent State in Ohio. And the trees, when he was there, suffered a blight. And there was a particular tree that he so loved and enjoyed sitting under. And he said that every single day, in the middle of the day, he would go find the tree and he would walk around it. He would touch the trunk and walk around the tree in a circle with his hand on the trunk, and then spend a few minutes there just wishing it well, just hoping it well, just wishing it, giving it, for what we would say at the time, good vibes, right? Just holding the space for that tree to be spared. And that when the blight got to its worst, that all of the trees on campus died except that one. So I'm going to leave you with that little story. I have had, especially as a kid, plenty of experiences with trees, and we'll get into some of those tree stories and myths about trees later on in the class. But for now, let's just relax and end our class with a good, slow, deep meditation, shall we? Okay. Take a few slow, deep breaths. And as you breathe, bring your attention down deep into the sensations of breathing. And allow yourself to relax. Find that place between in-breath and out-breath. And let yourself rest there. Close your eyes. And breathing in, you rise to the still point. And breathing out, you drift down to the still point at the bottom. Relax. As you relax, your body softens, your jaw releases, your belly lets go of tension, and you feel yourself settle down onto the surface beneath you. As you relax, your mind becomes still, and you float effortlessly on your breath, rising up and drifting down. And in the silence, images begin to rise around you. And you find yourself at dawn walking through a forest. The air is cool and moist. The birds are singing. The sun is just making it over the horizon, and the shadows of the trees are long, and the sunlight is pale and golden. And you can feel the shift in the trees around you as the light touches them. You can sense them respond. And you respond. You turn to the rising sun and stretch and feel its warmth on your face. And you look around and find a particular tree that just calls to you. And you walk over to it and gaze up through its branches and listen to the morning breeze making the leaves whisper. You see the birds darting around high up in the canopy. And you have this sense suddenly that this tree is aware of you. And if trees could smile, was smiling at you, was aware of your presence with a feeling of acceptance. And you lay your palm against the trunk of the tree and think of all the air that these trees make, that you breathe. The great breath of the forest, breathing in carbon dioxide and breathing out oxygen. The lungs of the world. And you let yourself feel gratitude to that tree and to all her kin. And you sit down at the base of that tree and just look out across the forest and watch as it wakes around you. And you become aware of the trees communicating with each other. You just feel it in your body. A humming, a buzzing. And you feel light and free and happy. And for you, again, this forest is a place of magic, a place of connection, a place where you can leave all your troubles and remember that you're never alone. And so you close your eyes and lean back against the trunk of that tree. And you breathe, slowly calling yourself back, breath by breath, into the moment, into your body, into the room in which you rest. Returning to the moment, you feel light and free, and you allow your eyes to open. Thank you for being with me today. I hope you enjoyed Class 1. If you have any thoughts or comments, please feel free to contact me. And I'll see you next week as we continue our journey together. Bye now.